have no evidence of these guys existing before 48 hours.
Hey,
and I've tried digging pretty deep. Go ahead.
Language, can I just get something, because I dropped off and you said what before all this? I'm sorry, you said what was blown up? You said missiles were moved, or they weren't there.
Yeah, so there was, after the strike on Saki Air Base.
There we go. Okay, go ahead.
There was about 400 of these S-300 missiles, which have been increasingly used in a ground attack capacity, that were stored at this ammo depot a decent bit further north, near actually a bridge that connects Crimea to the mainland of Ukraine. People thought the bridge was hit. Later turned out it was this ammo depot. There's explosions there. We have no idea what exploded there, how many are left. What is known is before that happened, at least 120 of these were moved out in, the first 2 weeks of this month. Could be anywhere, right? There's also I'm skipping ahead of myself, but there's also been a large resupply of Russian ships in the Black Sea to the tune of about 30 missiles that are just hanging out. And then we have another 60 missiles that are somewhere between Belgorod and Belarus. And the concern is a saturation attack against Ukrainian infrastructure, which seems somewhat likely to me, because these haven't been fired the same way. I mean, generally, the Russians are pretty good about they load it, they fire it, they load it, they fire it. These have been sitting pretty, and frankly, there's also been a notable decrease in shelling along certain areas of the front lines immediately bordering Russia. So, but jumping back into whatever happened in Moscow, and Dugin's, the people who are claiming responsibility, this is all a manifesto being sent by a former Russian, essentially parliamentarian. He was kicked out or left of his own volition. I'm not sure on the specifics, after he opposed the 2014 invasion of Crimea and Ukraine. He's been de facto a Ukrainian citizen for some time now. He says that he was working, or that people within Ukraine were working with this group, and that they were responsible for other acts of arson and whatnot in Russia. The only thing that makes this somewhat credible to me, because their manifesto reads very weirdly. They really don't talk about Putin at all, and it doesn't seem right the way that it's worded. There's a couple inconsistencies there. Is that they said he goes to say these people were also responsible for a attack on an oil pipeline, and the FSB actually confirmed that they killed 2 people trying to blow up an oil pipeline in Volgograd. So your guess is as good as mine. Was it an FSB, false flag a la the 99 apartment bombings? Was it a group of people we've never heard of managing to rear their head? Is it, something else? Did somebody piss off the Bratva? I have no idea. So I think at this point we just kind of have to figure out what comes next. So with that, let's go to John.
Yeah, just to briefly comment on the movement of those S-300, S-400 missiles. We need to consider that those missiles and those systems, when used in a land attack role, despite potentially the Russians fitting them with GLONASS guidance units, as well as potentially INS guidance, their accuracy is god awful. It's terror bombing. They have no capacity, as far as we can tell, to strike any specific target with any degree of precision with those munitions in a land attack role. So, I mean, they could, rain 100 of them on Kiev if they wanted to.
60 of them at the Parliament building, I'm going to hit something. That's the concern, that they're looking for a saturation attack the same way they did several months ago.
What I would point out is that even if they do go through this bombardment, be it with, repurposed surface-to-air missiles or standoff munitions, be it calibers KH-55/101s or KH-22/32s, the simple fact of the matter is, even if they go through with it, even setting aside the accuracy issues, and that would reduce it to a little more than just random terror bombing, I'm not convinced that they could successfully, genuinely impair Ukrainian C2. I mean, I'm open to being, refuted on that. But, language, I'm not sure if you would, if you agree with this take or not, but, they launched massive cruise and ballistic missile strikes against the capital on the first day of the war. And as far as I'm aware, that did not significantly degrade Ukrainian command and control capacity beyond the general confusion that was already kind of going on, which is, to be expected on on the first day of an invasion. Um, my understanding is that they did not, significantly disrupt Ukrainian command and control on that first night. And we have to keep in mind that their ability to carry out, strikes with these standoff munitions then was significantly, I don't say more advanced, but not as degraded as it is now. Would you agree with that?
I I think that the biggest difference here and the concern is that if they're directly and deliberately attempting to target government institutions, that would be different than what we've seen in the past, where it was generally a terror bombing, but we weren't seeing rockets landing in the government quarter. So hopefully I'm wrong. I'd love to be proven wrong. I'd love to see that none of this happens. But quite frankly, I've already told people that are in Kiev now, go take a vacation for a week. And that's me overstepping my bounds on what these people should do with their life. But I am gravely concerned about what happens between the 23rd and the 26th.
Thank you. And if I could also add this brief point, my understanding is that all of the buildings in Bankova being a street that most significant Ukrainian government buildings, the presidential administration building, the Verkhovna Rada building, among a variety of others, are situated along. My understanding is that there is a quite complex bunker network beneath all of them. I'm not sure that any of these Russian standoff munitions necessarily have the ground penetrating capacity to be able to deal with those. So that's another variable to consider there.
Entirely possible. With that, I'll dive back into it if that works for everybody. We're now that we've kind of talked to death the bombing in Moscow. Speaking about other general developments in central western Ukraine, the head of the regional SBU, the Ukrainian Intelligence Agency department in Kievorad Oblast, a Lieutenant Colonel Alexander Nakocheny, which is just about 2 districts south of Kiev, just south of Cherkasy, a little northwest of Mykolaiv Oblast, was found dead with a gunshot wound to the head last night. Currently, there is a criminal and investigative case being opened. His wife claims that they heard the gunshot and found the body, and there's been statements expressed that it was a suicide. The lieutenant colonel has been in his duty station since January of 2021. Before that, he had spent about 10 years doing anti-corruption activities. Otherwise, we're not entirely sure what's going on. But this would be like an FBI, I'd say, more than a department manager, an FBI, officer responsible for a large area, shooting himself in the head. So more to come on that. Moving east towards the Sumy and Chernihiv regions, generally, Russia continues to indiscriminately shell along the border regions, but there's no indication that they're going to launch any assault anytime soon. Moving further east towards Kharkiv, over the last 40 hours, Russian troops have attempted some assaults along the front due north of Kharkiv city in the towns of Borshova and Pytomyk, but both of them were repelled. They also apparently tried to skirmish around a couple other areas that they've been fighting over for quite some time. Dementivka, they tried to fight into there some, not an exaggeration, 30, 40 times, but they have been remarkably unsuccessful. Otherwise, shelling continues as regular, with both Russian and Ukrainian forces, each targeting the other's backline regions. There is evidence that Ukraine has fired across the Donetsk River to the east, possibly against Russian artillery positions that have been striking the Starty Saltiv area for some time. It's demonstrating that Ukrainian artillery capabilities, if they cannot quite reach out to the Russian logistics and supply lines on the far side of the river, they can at least wake them up at night. Russia has announced that it will close the airspace in the Belgorod, Vorozhne, and Lipetsk regions between the 23rd and 26th, all of which lie due northeast of Kharkiv. There is speculation this will be the launching site of Russian missiles on the 24th. Partially in response to these concerns, the Ukrainian train service will not be operating in Kharkiv city on the 24th under heavy concern of massive Russian shelling. However, at least a number of these reinforced concrete bunkers at bus stations have been installed. Apparently, they can hold about 50 people a pop. The plan is to have 25 of them. I know at least a handful are currently up and running. Moving further south towards Izium and Amman, Russian troops continue to use rocket artillery and these S-300 missiles in a ground attack capacity against civilian infrastructure in Sloviansk. Russia did intensify attacks across the last 48 hours in the northwestern front of Sloviansk, closer to Barvenko, southwest of Izium. There's been no apparent success. The apparent shuffling of Russian artillery and manpower from this region has left Russian forces generally incapable of sustained assaults. Russia has reportedly been focused on replenishing its ammunition stockpiles in this area, and thus they're sort of everything they get in, they're firing. They don't necessarily have the stockpiles built up after numerous artillery and HIMARS strikes on their backlines. Moving further east towards Seversk and Lysychansk, Russian troops attempted attacks along the southeastern front towards Seversk, near the town of Ivano-Dorivka, which was repelled with Ukrainian artillery fire. Russian forces appear to have been generally redeployed further towards the southern portion of this region, menacing Bakhmut and its environs. Otherwise, artillery fire and airstrikes continue along the front lines, with Ukrainian artillery fires reaching deeper into the northern section of the front, closer to some Russian command and control and electronic warfare units. Moving down towards Bakhmut, Bakhmut has been in a rough situation for a while now. There's been increased footage of the artillery damage to the city, not to the same level of rubbleized as, say, Severodonetsk or Lysychansk, but it's more akin to what Popasna looked like. Around Bakhmut itself, Russian troops have apparently slowed their efforts to directly assault in from the east along the main highway because they've been having trouble with crossing numerous kilometers of large flat fields into the Ukrainian strongpoints, which are installed within this industrial area. Russian airstrikes have been centralized in this region, but they've stopped throwing their troops against it after the first number of them got blown up. The bulk of Russian troops have been focused on assaulting into the southeast, outside the city itself, rather than pushing into the urban area. Russian forces have had no major success along the southern front in the past 48 hours around the Ukrainian strongpoint of Kodema, which is currently the southernmost Ukrainian strongpoint of the city. It is worth noting that there remains at least one prepared defensive line in this area dating back all the way to 2014, and the only reason the Russians were able to essentially defeat the other two is because they attacked from the east into there as opposed to from the south. Otherwise, along the Bakhmut-Lysychansk highway, Russian forces continue to heavily shell Soledar to the northeast in an attempt to gain access to a northern road, the main highway, into and out of Bakhmut. Currently, they seem content to just sit on the outskirts and shell into the mining city rather than assault directly inside. Given how Berestov, town up the road that was captured by Russian troops a couple weeks ago, only fell after essentially being leveled to rubble over several weeks, this seems to be the Russian general plan here, where they are remarkably reluctant to actually engage in urban combat until they grind the city into dust. Moving down to Donetsk, Russian troops have successfully consolidated some control over the southwest suburb of Avdiivka, Pisky, P-I-S-K-Y, after having essentially leveled the town over the last several months and assaulting into it last week. However, this still only grants direct access to another set of rivers less than 4 kilometers away to the north if the Russian troops intend to use the suburb to form another assault direction towards Avdiivka, which if they were going in a straight line, it'd be 10 kilometers, or 15 to 20 if they want to use the major highways. There is a small riverbank town on that northern river that they would have to push through called Vodyan, which has been shelled increasingly today with artillery and airstrikes, and Russian troops have apparently been moving across the fields a couple kilometers just outside that town. The bridges there are believed to be destroyed or mined. Otherwise, there is very limited evidence that Russia plans to move further west from the town of Pisky. Instead, all of their eggs are still in the basket of trying to take Avdiivka. The city itself has intensely come under heavy sustained bombing for essentially 6 hours straight today, with both aircraft and artillery. Reportedly, even the last stubborn civilian holdouts are now leaving the city. Russian forces, much further south to the west of Donetsk city, have apparently entered into the suburb of Marinka proper, with Ukrainian troops striking Russian tanks along the town's southern edge. This seems to indicate that Russian troops are both continuing their offensive into the city from the east, but have also reached the center of the suburban town enough that they can push out to the south in multiple directions. Ukrainian artillery has been seen firing into the town, indicating that Ukrainian forces have withdrawn somewhat. Overall, per the U.S. Department of Defense, Russian losses in the east have resulted in stalled defensive momentum on a large scale. Moving down to Mariupol, work continues on massive cages and other prep for a large sham trial for Ukrainian defenders in Mariupol, allegedly scheduled for the 24th to line up with Ukraine's Independence Day. Zelensky stated that in the event of such a sham trial taking place, any peace talks with Russia would be canceled. Reportedly, per Russian media, a UN representative visited Ukrainian prisoners of war who only asked for cigarettes. However, there's been precisely zero statement by the UN about this, so this is currently very much invalidated, and it could very well just be propaganda. Moving to Zaporizhia and the southern axis, Ukrainian troops carried out more than 200 fire missions along the southern front, with specific targeting of Russian attempts to repair the Kakhovka Dam Bridge. Partisan work continues in Melitopol, where a Russian soldier who was attempting to kidnap and sexually assault a young girl was attacked and had his throat slit in the street, the aftermath of which was captured on video. Additionally, there were multiple explosions around Melitopol claimed to be the work of resistance forces. Russia accused Ukrainian forces of using chemical weapons, drawing references to instances of botulism poisoning near Enerhodar. Specifically, there are reports that this food poisoning, because that can also be how you get botulism if you ever tried canning something, was the result of drinking what is essentially improperly stored moonshine that was being created by these soldiers. Explosions were reported near one of the Zaporizhzhia nuclear power plant administration buildings, with Russia claiming Ukrainian strikes. Russia continues to shell across the Dnipro River from units stationed here, indiscriminately shelling the towns of Marhanets and Nikopol, where they destroyed a graveyard, indicating a lack of targeting, precision, or desire for either. Ukrainian shelling has been seen around Enerhodar on the supply routes outside the city that are coming from the west, south, and east, but we haven't seen any evidence of Ukrainian artillery shelling into the nuclear power plant itself, because that would be ludicrous and crazy. Moving further west towards Kherson, Russian forces have been stalled out around Oleksandrivka, the one to the west, not any of the other 30 in the region, after successfully counterattacking a premature Ukrainian offensive along the coast. The Russian large armored platoon or two along the northwest highway towards Mykolaiv continues assaults towards Ukrainian positions near Posad Pokrovsk in an attempt to remove Ukrainian troops from conventional artillery range of places such as Chornobaika, which was also hit over the weekend. Russian aircraft based out of Crimea carried out 5 airstrikes, and Ukrainian forces carried out 2 along the Oleksandrivka front, again, this area to the southwest. Additionally, Ukrainian forces continue to fire on areas around the Kakhovka Bridge, where Russia has been attempting repairs to restore a route across the river, as currently they're believed to not have any functional bridges. There is photo evidence of Russian troops attempting to construct a large pontoon bridge next to the damaged Antonovsky Bridge, apparently lashing it to the pillars. This is well over a kilometer in width on the river here, so it'll stand to be seen if this is successful in any way. And Ukrainian citizens leaving the Kherson region via Russian-controlled checkpoints are urged to delete not only messenger apps, but also their cloud storage backups, as Russian forces have become wise to this and have started working to restore archived messages in order to locate anti-Russian sentiment. Additionally, increased interrogations are being performed on not just the parents, but also on children without their parents present in order to try and identify partisans. Kidnappings generally continue in Kherson, and the situation remains fraught with peril for partisans as well as for Russian troops who get caught by themselves. Moving to Odessa, the Black Sea, and Crimea, reportedly in the Black Sea, there are 5 missile-carrying ships with a minimum of 30 cruise missiles available for use. The Russian fleet is staying closer to the Crimean coast in an area protected from Ukrainian missile strikes and is generally comprised of about 12 ships and boats. The recent rearming follows with Ukrainian concerns for large missile strikes on the 24th. There have been a number of reported explosions in Crimea, allegedly the work of Russian air defense over the past 48 hours. Sevastopol specifically has reported multiple air defense systems engaging targets, which are reportedly more of these commercially sourced Sky Eye 5000 drones, which you can buy yourself on Alibaba right now for about $10,000, and by the time you finish putting a motor and whatnot on them, you're into it for about 15 to 20 grand. It's a lot cheaper than an air defense missile, And we've seen some of these things flying around, including one many months ago that actually hit a fuel refinery in Russia proper, and another one which hit the Russian naval headquarters after the Russians tried to shoot it down with their AKs and failed. Apparently, though, that one did not fly in from the north or the west of Crimea, but somehow managed to fly in from the east in the direction of Russia. Where exactly these are being launched from, we have no idea. Apparently, air raid sirens were heard in downtown Sevastopol during some air defense systems engaging tonight. At least one drone was blown up just at the mouth of the port, right near the Naval College. And there's been a tremendous number of concerned Russian tourists leaving. There's generally a pretty bad traffic backlog on the Kerch Strait Bridge right now. Otherwise, in Odessa, a floating sea mine from recent storms was destroyed in place by Ukrainian troops on the coast. This has been the second in as many days, and that there's been reported Russian missile strikes on agricultural infrastructure, not in Odessa proper, but closer to the coast. In general, yesterday, Ukrainian forces eliminated 300 soldiers for a total of 45,200, 12 armor vehicles, 5 tanks, 10 artillery guns, 6 cars or trucks, and 3 UAVs, with the greatest losses being around Bakhmut. Russia has continued to have issues with mobilizing new units, with a single tank battalion only able to recruit 30 out of the promised 160 individuals. Apparently, there is deliberate targeting of poorer citizens and minorities, as they are appraised to be both easier to recruit with financial offers and also reduces the, quote, protest potential, unquote, of these regions should the socioeconomic situation in Russia deteriorate further. The Ministry of Defense of Albania, a couple days ago, announced the detention of 2 Russian citizens and 1 Ukrainian citizen who tried to enter the territory of a military factory in the city of Gramsh and injured 2 Albanian soldiers. The detainees are suspected of espionage. And the Ministry of Foreign Affairs of Austria summoned a Russian diplomat who had urged Russian troops to, quote, not spare Ukrainians, and made a number of other inflammatory statements. Otherwise, slightly more positive news. The vessel carrying Ukrainian grain has arrived in Ireland. I believe this is the first one that's been able to make it all the way around the Mediterranean to the UK and Ireland. With that, if there's any questions, I'm happy to stick around for a little bit.
Yeah, language. Mike, can you all hear me?
Loud and clear. Now you're good.
Okay, sorry. Thank you. Yeah, I froze up. Hey, so I had a question in regards to these attacks that we're seeing from Russia. These quote unquote, I use the word attack very lightly, right? I'm wondering if, what is the point of them, right? They don't seem to have the strength, because I'm seeing the same thing around Kharkiv that you're seeing, as well as the same kind of petering out, if you will, of Russian forces around Bakhmut. Not to say that they don't have ammunition or they don't have some fighting power. I'm not saying that they're just a bunch of Boy Scouts there. But I'm kind of getting the sense that some of these attacks don't have a whole lot of point behind them, except to maybe get Ukraine's attention to some degree, because there doesn't seem to be a whole lot of oomph behind them, right? I mean, they move forward, they try to conduct some measure of operations, they move 2 or 3 miles down the road, and then they just kind of peter out. Is that kind of the same thing you're seeing as well?
Just about. It was. We've seen a lot of these recon and force operations where Russia tries to push through, but they're not doing so. Either they're sending too many troops for them to be stealthy and just look at it, but they're not sending enough troops to exploit weaknesses when they actually show up. So they're kind of getting the worst of both worlds here, where they don't have enough where if they come across a Ukrainian position they can break through. They can't, but they're not sending so few that they can make it across fields without getting blown to hell by artillery. We've seen a lot more of this near Kharkiv, where they just constantly kind of launch these, assaults until they start getting shelled and then they pull back. Around Bakhmut, I don't really see what necessarily is, their plan here, because there's been areas where they have been assaulting into it. Otherwise, they've just been sort of sitting on the sidelines and shelling. That's just generally what we've seen here. When they do assault, though, they throw a lot into it. The Russian counteroffensive northwest of Kherson, they threw. It depends on what you're reading, because they've just been saying it's been 2 units. I've seen some people saying it was 2 platoons. Some people saying it was 2, lesser units. of just armor and whatnot. So that just seems to be what we're dealing with here. When they want to take something, they throw as much armor at it as they possibly can. We haven't necessarily been seeing that in these other regions.
How do you feel about this hypothesis that their activity around Bakhmut is only designed to creep around towards Soledar, the way you would realize, what you had said, to try to create another salient following that highway north towards Lysychansk? That it's not to envelop Bakhmut and try to storm it. It's more to try to keep those units in line so they have a road north to try to, box the Ukrainians in three directions there, to the east, to the north, and to the south. How does that hypothesis work out for you in terms of what you've seen?
I think Bakhmut is the goal now, and Seversk isn't. Bakhmut is something that's maybe more reasonably attainable. Let's see if it is. But Russia has access to it from the south and to the east in a lot more of a way than Seversk, which is bordered by a river to the north, and which the south is controlled by Ukrainian forces, as well as some areas to the east of it. I think they're desperate for a win.
Don't you mean Solid? Do you mean Soledar? I'm sorry. Did I hear the right name? You broke up a little bit.
Yeah. So I was talking about Seversk to the north, and
Seversk. Oh,
right.
Excuse me. I'm sorry. Yeah, sorry about that. Go.
No. You're good. And then Soledar. I think the goal is not to rush up the highway, because frankly, the highway just takes them up towards Lysychansk. They don't really need to do that. Versus if they can come into Bakhmut from the north and from the south, if they're able to clear out these Ukrainian positions, then that means that they'll not only be able to avoid some of these eastern death traps that are set up, but also the fact that there's at least 3 rivers. There might be a 4th that I'm not aware of that run through Bakhmut north-south. You can think of them like grid lines. And that's going to be a real pain in the ass if Russia wants to cross it. So, I think that's what their goal is.
Yeah, because I'm trying to read the firms. I'm trying to see where they're firing, right? And if you look at that map, because I only follow ISW, if you just kind of look at that, I don't see. I see more of them trying to go towards Soledar and focus on the highway, even though what would be the point of that except to go north, right? Unless you're trying to envelop Bakhmut, unless you're trying to encircle it. But I feel like Soledar is kind of their route north to get to the Ukrainian units. That's just kind of like my methodology of thinking, right? Because I know you're right about gosh, I always forget the name. Serviesk, excuse me. I know you're right about that, but I just feel like they're trying to somehow squeeze the Ukrainians out of everything east of the E40, right, to the south of Sibirsk, right? That's kind of like the way that I'm trying to view it as, but that's my hypothesis. But John, Carl, go ahead, take it away.
Hi, I might have missed a little bit of context, but you're talking about 2 days or so that you'd be worried about like missile attacks, whether Kharkiv or Kiev or whatever. I just want to kind of know what the context and behind that worry is.
Sorry, could you just repeat that one again?
I think I can probably answer it pretty briefly. The concern is it's Ukrainian Independence Day on the 24th, if I'm not mistaken, and there was some conjecture that Russia may be stockpiling weapons for an attack on that specific day, kind of as a response, because there hasn't been any large direct reaction since all of the airstrikes in Crimea. Got it. Thank you.
John?
Thanks. Appreciate the update. I'm curious if you had seen the general staff report that Ukraine had increased its deliveries of missiles and artillery shells of various descriptions significantly. I believe the specific figure was they had exceeded, and since February 24th to a few days ago when the report was released, they had exceeded their annual delivery targets in that 6-month period by 600%. I'm curious if you had any insight into whether or not that was referring exclusively to new production missiles and shells, or if that also includes missiles and shells being reactivated, from storage and deep storage. It seemed like they were reusing a lot of S-125 surface-to-air missiles. My understanding is that Ukraine had a pretty extensive modernization and upgrade program from them, according to Konstantin, and a number of other goodies were in the video, some air-to-air missiles, etc. Beyond that, do you have any insight into what specific missiles Ukraine has retained the capability to produce at this point?
That's not something I focused on. Unfortunately, I can't really lay claim to anything except for the ones that are being used in their short-range air defense systems. Other than that, I genuinely have no clue.
We do have a few open spots on the speaker panel. If anybody has a question for language or a general question for the space, feel free to request the mic.
Otherwise, feel free to click that little button in the lower left-hand corner. We'll come on up. Promise we won't bite your heads off. If I said something that's wrong, something you don't understand, do let me know. Because if you have a question about, there's probably a good dozen other people who don't understand it either. I know sometimes I talk a little quick. Otherwise, if you're feeling shy, feel free to shoot a DM. Any of the members of our panel up here, Craig, John, Gurney, Ryan, Finance, myself, Nesser, we're more than happy to answer. With that, let's go to Craig.
Yeah, actually, let's throw it to Jerome first, because I just wanted to have a little bit of a back and forth on you in regards to Russian losses in the Donbass and around Bakhmut, if at all possible. So I'll let them go, and then we can try and have a little bit of a dialogue.
Jerome, go ahead. And then Anda, or Anda and Jerome, whoever can come off mute first. It's a race.
Okay, well, yeah, I just entered I'm sorry, did I jump in front of someone?
No, you're fine.
Okay, thank you. And again, I feel remiss if I don't mention just thanking the moderators for keeping this going and keeping it on the burner so everybody is aware of it and getting the word out. So, but I'm just trying to get a handle on. I do have a specific question that maybe not. Actually, I have a statement that like the test for response, but maybe now is not the correct time. But how do I allay my fears when I hear you're speaking of advancements toward Bakhmut and balancing that out with just a general feeling of, the tide is in Ukraine's favor. Are these just independent moves of different sections of the Russian front? I don't know how to quite formulate the question, but are these advances worrisome, I guess? And I guess they're always worrisome. But a statement I wanted to try out was if I were to say that the West is less concerned about technology falling into Russians' hands because they're falling so far behind. They're losing the ability to reverse engineer. Is that a faulty statement? Maybe now's not the time to ask that.
Yeah, I can hit them both. They're both good questions. I'll answer the second one first. I think we're less worried about what Russia can do and more worried about what they can turn around and sell to China. There are certain things that we're just never going to send them. We're not going to send whatever bleeding edge UFO, 8th generation fighter aircraft that may or may not exist, say Groom Lake, right? We're not going to send those. We're not going to send drones that are top of the line because those can get killed by electronic warfare, shot down, and their chips harvested. We're not going to do that. It's been taking a tremendous amount of pushing and shoving to even send them what's essentially the recon version of a Predator drone that can fly higher. And that's been, months in the making. There's still a real concern because things will get shot down, things will get lost. We've lost M777s, etc. But what those can be used and sold for and sent to less friendly nations. Now, things like the M777 specifically, as I'm going to delve into it a bit, just because you know how it works doesn't mean you can make it yourself. The Chinese already reverse engineered it. They have a name for it. I'm blanking on it. It's a carbon copy. However, because they don't have the same metal refining capabilities that we do, and we use a lot of titanium in it, the Chinese tried to cheap out. They use aluminum, and if we had CJ here, we could explain why using aluminum in a very lightweight gun, firing a very big bullet with a lot of back, pressure on it, doesn't tend to work out well for longevity. So just because there are certain things that we feel more comfortable sending, some things we feel less comfortable sending, but unfortunately that will continue to be an issue. I mean, frankly, I'd love to see F-35s flying across, Odessa. That's probably never going to happen, right? And there's also been things that have been stripped out from certain weapon systems we have sent just so they don't fall into enemy hands. As far as the first question, which is a very good one, hey, we're looking at Russia advancing here, there, wherever. I mean, you can't, because this is a large battlefield spanning thousands of kilometers. So it's very difficult to say, and I wish I could, this person, Russia is winning today, Ukraine is winning today. It's never quite so black and white. Because how do you measure that? In territory taken? Okay, well, does a forest that puts you between two rivers, does taking that really buy you anything? Or does putting your artillery within range of Kherson buy you something, right? It's very difficult to quantify. I do try and focus on the hyper-granular details here because there are places where Russia is advancing and it's important to be aware of them. It's not to scare people or to say, and I'm not suggesting you said that or anybody here said that, but I've gotten that concern in the past that I'm over-representing Russian victories. Frankly, I'm not, just to be blunt on that. But if you're not aware of where these troops are and when they are taking things, and you are only consuming media that tells you that, Russia's on the back foot, Russia's on the back foot, oh, by the way, they just took Popasna, that's going to cause a level of cognitive dissonance and fear as a result that is entirely avoidable. So there are certain areas where Russia has had minimal success. It's important to note that really it's taken them months to achieve this minimal success, and aside from a very small area in eastern Donbass, they've been tremendously unsuccessful. Everything else along the southern front is essentially frozen. Along Kherson, they took maybe 5 kilometers in a straight line across fields because they threw a bunch of tanks at it, and in another area where a Ukrainian unit messed up. But otherwise, we're not seeing storming offensives the same way we did early on. So yes, Russia is still on the offensive, is still capable of carrying out localized offensive operations, but it is a very different war, and I would still argue the time is in the Ukrainians' favor, because as there's increasing deterioration of Russian combat-effective supplies, combat-effective troops, and the increased support from Western allies of Ukraine, then the balance starts to tip more on one side than the other. Very long response, but hopefully it allays some of the concerns because it's a very good.
Yeah, language. I got to say, like your updates, I don't know if you did this beforehand or something, but I find them to be they're very balanced. The way you give the information, you give it in a clockwise way. I just find it's great. And it's very balanced, I think. It's very balanced. And I just wanted to make one note, and then I'll be quiet, was this morning around 10:30, very interesting discussion on Starlinks and how they give off a heat signature. And the fellow who knew some stuff picked up some very good information from Verlaine, and it was just very interesting discussion on electronic warfare. And so if anybody wants to listen, very good. Thank you.
No, I'm sorry I missed that. I'm always down for good talk on electronic warfare. Thank you, and thank you for the kind words. Anda, to you.
Hi, good evening. Thank you. Thank you for what you're doing and for being you. That being said, I have 3 questions until my phone dies. One, about the ICI.
The satellite, yeah. Hopefully we didn't just lose you there. Don't forget to charge your phones, folks.
Did she go mute or did she disappear entirely? No, I'm just still here. Let me drop her real quick.
Lady down.
Anda, we lowered you down. We lost your audio. Please re-request and we'll bring you right back.
So just as a background for what she was talking about, ICEYE, that's ICEYE. It's a satellite, a recon satellite, essentially, that was purchased by crowdfunded donations from Ukraine. They were crowdfunding to buy 3 Bayraktars. There's been a couple other countries, Poland, a number of others whose name currently escapes me, that have also crowdfunded for it. And each one of these, Baykar, the company that makes them, has gotten tremendously great PR. And they've said, we're not taking your money. It's no good here. Have a free drone for the amount that you would have raised. Apparently, in this case with Ukraine, which raised about 16 million US dollars, or like 600 million hryvnia, they were able to purchase exclusive access to one of these recon satellites. And what's important and shouldn't be overlooked, satellite insurance, which is apparently something you can get along with your homeowner's bundle. They ended up buying that because Russia has very capable electronic warfare systems. Per what they're stated to do, the Krashuka 4, like the one they left in the field and we stole from them back at the beginning of the war, they can actually blind satellites from orbit. Those are military-grade ones. This is not a military-grade satellite. It's something similar to Maxar or whatnot. It is a radar-enhanced satellite, which, without getting into the nitty-gritty of it, means it can see through clouds. And this passes over Ukraine twice a day. And because it can be tasked directly by Ukraine, as opposed to having to rely on Western intelligence agencies, means hopefully they will get information at a faster rate and they can share it more quickly as a result. The difference is, because frankly, when you see photos from Western satellites, if people aren't leaking them in ways they're not supposed to, they reduce the resolution on them so they can't see that we can, see what the text on your, toenail says, right? So that takes some time, plus figuring out what makes sense, what doesn't, different time zones. It's a lot easier to just say, hey, Yevgeny, I need a picture of this, bang. Okay, here's one at 12 a.m. and here's one at 12 noon, right? So that's a good thing, and hopefully I've burned up enough time for Anda to come back and actually ask a question.
Let's get her up. Apologies. I did not, sorry, I was trying to work through a message. She is connecting now. And hopefully she does not have Twitter pox. Anda, go ahead while you still have battery.
I have battery. It just heats up. So the question was, if the bulk of the army can use this satellite, these images, in order to assess the position of the enemy, or not. But from your explanation, I suppose it's not that good.
Well, no, it's still a good satellite. I mean, this one is, I want to say the resolution is 0.5 meter to 1 meter per pixel, which is pretty good. I mean, it's not going to show you individual troop numbers, but it'll let you know where they're basing stuff out of. And frankly, that's pretty decent. I know that if you use like real general commercial free imagery, that's like 30 meters. So this is an order of magnitude better than that, because this, without getting too much into it, as you go down in size per pixel, it does make it dramatically better. However, there has been issues in the past with Ukrainian satellite intelligence and intelligence in general not being shared down to the unit level. There's been issues with compartmentalization. There's been issues with different units not necessarily trusting each other, just general holdouts from the Soviet system where people kind of held information to themselves. Not the case in all of the units, but there's been some that find other units especially, and I'll just call what it is, some with foreign volunteers who are really terrible about posting information online, and as a consequence have not been trusted as much with it, and that has resulted in people getting killed because intelligence wasn't shared and they didn't know that there was a drone orbiting them for 2 days before it blew them all to hell. So that's an institutional issue that will have to be addressed. However, now that the information is routing directly through Ukrainian intelligence service and government services, it should be easier to farm out the information to individual units rather than getting it perhaps a little more piecemeal from different sources. So it's still a very good thing. I want to say you can take a picture of about 225 square kilometers per snapshot, which is going to give you a lot of info. So even if they're just doing that twice a day, it'll make things a little bit easier. They can start to figure out on a bi-daily basis where things are and where things are moving. So it's still a very good thing. There's a reason it costs $16 billion. And there's a lot of jokes about it being like the all-seeing eye of Sauron. right now up in the sky.
Well, and I would also add that at least up to now, they've been relying on probably shared satellite intel from NATO assets. And while those have much higher resolution or fidelity, they are also busy doing a bunch of other things. So you put in a request to retask a satellite, and you may or may not, make the order of importance. Ukraine having their own satellite, they can make their own command decisions and task it for the things they need. If there's something that they feel they don't have a high enough resolution on, I'm sure they could escalate that request and probably receive satellite imagery from a much better eye in the sky.
That's a very good point. This is the binocular versus the telescope. It'll let you see a wider area. And if you really want to zoom in on something, you can call your friendly neighborhood, U.S. intelligence agency, and they'll help you out with that.
Yeah, I don't think we're using Hubble anymore. Maybe we could turn that thing back around and point it towards the Earth. And that's a joke, by the way. I don't want to get jumped by John.
Thank you. I also have another question regarding the Azovstal POVs. Do we know? So it's like blank. I haven't seen any news for the last, I don't know, 2 or 3 weeks. So do we know anything about it?
About the drone specific? I'm sorry, you kind of cut out there for me at the beginning.
Sorry, about the Azovstal
Yeah.
prisoners.
So, yeah, unfortunately on the 20th, so winding back a bit, Azovstal prisoners surrendered May 21st, I want to say. By and large, were taken to the Olenivka prison camp, where there was ongoing discussions about prisoner transfers. It's unclear what the status of those are now. What has happened since then is there was a blast, widely believed to be an intentionally placed explosive device by Russian soldiers, which killed at least 50, wounded at least 90 of the Azovstal defenders who were there. And then Russia tried to blame it on Ukraine in this real crackpot theory. But since then,